What is the truth? I think a lot of problems start when we oracleize words. So let's use the truth for example. When we oracleize the truth, the word truth becomes this thing itself when it's not necessarily a thing. It's correctness in a lot of cases. So correctness is basically just an apparent circumstance that is objective, so independent of observation, or is observation. So a feeling is a feeling. It's probably a truth that is one truth that is true in and of itself. You can't really deny a feeling unless you're saying you don't have feelings or something else like that. When you want to turn the truth or something else into this kind of mysterious thing we're out in search for, it becomes I think it can get confusing when we use words. So like value. Value is often in the way I've seen it used, it's kind of like made to look like an oracle of some kind, like some mysterious something within experience, but really it's just a relational word. All it means is it represents a unit when you have a net sum equation. So we use suffering as the negative. Why would we do that? Is it arbitrary? I don't think so. Because pain is obviously something we want to avoid intrinsically. We want to avoid it intrinsically. Pain for the sake of pain is antithetical to desire. So you can't do pain for the sake of pain no matter how hard you try, because even if you were trying, it would just be trying to be correct, which is kind of a pride thing, which isn't really pain for the sake of pain anymore. And then there's masochism. Obviously we know that we have to go through some pains to get a greater reward, because if I just sat here all day I probably wouldn't feel very good. So we have to do other things to maintain our health, to get a greater satisfaction from just doing normal things. That's just a fact for the most part. And with masochism, it's usually just to relieve, or I'm pretty sure that it's just to relieve a greater burden you're feeling. So like if you feel really guilty, you might punish yourself physically or mentally in some other way. You might hit yourself in the head over and over until the emotion goes away because you feel really guilty or something about whatever you did. Who knows? So that's like a psychological example, and a physical example would just be endorphins, or I think another word is endogenous. So the body produces this euphoria from releasing tension physically. So you inflict pain physically to get a euphoric feeling. An example would be suffocating yourself before you pass out or something, or if you pass out. So obviously you wouldn't want to brain damage yourself because you're probably not going to get much of a greater feeling, so you kind of hold it as long as you can. You kind of exhale all your air, and you hold it and don't take any breaths. And this kind of, when you finally do breathe, I'm going to do it right now, if possible, it creates a greater relief when you do breathe. So that's just one example. Obviously I don't want to do it right now, so that's an example. So you can try that yourself and see that it's the case. Obviously, if you chop off your arm, you're probably not going to get a very euphoric feeling, and you might do that out of some other emotion. So I don't know. It's just, my point is, pain is never done for the sake of pain. Pretty much ever, or ever. It's antithetical. That is the nature of suffering. That is the nature of pain. When you go down to a nerve, you really have no choice of whether it twitches or not, right? It's a stimuli thing. So on a base level, we have a visceral revulsion to pain. I imagine if you have no desires, you're probably not going to want to do much anyways. So if you have no desires, usually it's probably because you see no perceived reward for doing anything. So pain for the sake of pain is not a good enough motivator alone. So if you just torture somebody and expect them to, reproduce, it's probably not going to work, because you're probably just going to give up. Honestly, that's probably how, how most people die, is because they're just experiencing pain and they have nothing to reach onto. Everything's pain. There's no reward in anything. So even in those circumstances, even just the notion of accomplishment can be good enough in a lot of cases, but it really depends on what you believe, right? You have to actually believe you're accomplishing something. So I think the fundamental argument for stopping reproduction and ending life is basically realizing that your desires aren't accomplishing anything. So I'm not doing anything besides filling holes that were built within me, and I spend most of my life doing that. And it's becoming more obvious to me. It's really depressing, honestly, because there is no ultimate purpose besides the conditional purpose that consciousness presents, which is ending it. And that's only something you realize if you actually think about it. A lot of people don't think about it, so they think they're accomplishing something by fulfilling their desires. They think their accomplishments are maybe something good in and of itself. So it's really hard to do anything for the sake of itself if you realize that it's not really an accomplishment. So you can say something's valuable in and of itself, but it usually has something to do with some alleviation of pain, some prevention of pain, some kind of reward feeding. You can't really get much of a reward if you haven't been without the thing you're desiring. So if you just ate, for example, you're probably not going to feel very much hunger unless you have an eating disorder. So it's kind of you're not going to get as much satisfaction if you eat like 10 bags of potato chips. You're probably just going to feel like shit afterwards. So the brain works in weird ways, but ultimately pain is intrinsically something that motivates us, but it can't be done alone. You need that illusion of a reward, and it is just an illusion. So evolution obviously created a really good tool for dumb things, because they can't understand they're not actually accomplishing something, and they can't understand they're actually creating, maybe they can't really understand that they're having kids by having sex, right? But now we can, so it's kind of created this new dilemma that hasn't been seen on planet Earth, right? And up until recently, anti-natalism doesn't seem to have been that much talked about, probably because there was no social media. So, I'm sure there were people who were anti-natalists, but there was just not much communication, much sharing like there is on this medium. And I think this medium is kind of bad, but a lot of it, there really isn't a lot at stake, so people think they can just get away with anything. Most of the arguments I've seen against anti-natalism or ethicalism, more specifically, they usually paraphrase badly. So most of them want to categorize you into something they already understand, so they can quickly kind of make arguments, because they don't want to bother to actually listen to the words you're saying. They don't want to actually use the words you're saying. So if you say something like suffering is bad in and of itself, they'll say something like it's bad to you. So they're not using the words, they're not dealing with the words you're giving them. So if you want to argue with suffering is something we intrinsically avoid, which is what the argument I present, we want to avoid. And if we realize that our goals aren't ultimately accomplishing something, our desires, we ultimately have the same goal, and that is to end it, if you realize that. That's basically the only conclusion. So that's my argument, that's my way of debating that I've thought about. So That's my understanding. So, yeah. Use the words people actually say. And if you want to win an argument, be honest. Don't try to paraphrase people. Don't try to categorize them before you fully understand what they're saying. If they want to say they're a category, then let them say that. Don't tell people's arguments for them. That's bullshit. That's just a way to making it easier for yourself, so you can just not spend much time to understand. You just want a quick way to win, and that's bullshit. So, calling bullshit on that. The closest I ever got to, because I wanted to understand this thing from the inside out. I'm one of those people. I think I like to understand things from in outwards. So when I deconstructed, the arguments, I just took the words exactly and explicitly, like suffering is bad in and of itself. I would ask questions like, what is badness separated from suffering? And usually what I've heard is that it's inseparable. So to me, like, the words have to have definitions, or they're oracleized, basically. They're turned into this mysterious thing. But really, suffering is just something that motivates us away from it, right? If it obviously doesn't, even on a visceral level, we want to react to it usually. And you can only not react to it by training yourself not to react out of some kind of pride or something. Some kind of, wanting to just be. So it's usually pretty much always out of a desire, I believe. I believe it's all out of desire, so that's my argument. I don't need to oracleize value. When I ask, when someone, I think it just can get confusing when you say, you have to turn it into a substance, you have to turn it into a thing, when really consciousness is the only context that the notion of you, will ever exist in. So when you're dead, there is no notion of you. There's not even the notion, regardless of whether there is a self. Obviously the self, maybe you could just say it's the programs running in the background and you're the observer. So obviously it's kind of pointless because you wouldn't be aware of anything anyways. So even if consciousness weren't made of matter and energy, it's the only context. It's inescapable, and if you do escape it, there is no you. You're dead. So unless you're a computer, and you're saying, I don't know, the context of a computer matters, so what? It's composed of matter and energy, so what? Is that, you wouldn't even, there's no, yeah, I guess if you want to call that valuable, I mean, there's no way to sample that, obviously, because the only thing you can sample is consciousness. That's really it. So you can't really, you can just say whatever's valuable, but obviously we can taste consciousness, and there's no sampling or modeling devices and anything else. It's just cause and effect mechanics. It's just, it's just dice. Maybe a series of dice. I don't know how to metaphor that correctly, but yeah. It's just the only conclusion, really. You can't escape the context. The context is the only thing that will have relevancy in and of itself that you can actually sample and taste. So it's just pointless to evade anything. Just be honest. That's all I want to say. Just be honest. Deal with the actual arguments. Don't try to categorize or paraphrase. Literally use the words they say and let them explain. And if they're wrong, they're wrong. And if you're right, you're right. Like, don't try to take shortcuts. That goes for me. That goes for everyone.